Yes, please do. So you're also yeah, I know I will. I genuinely will. You're in charge for 3 days now. Yeah, yeah. She's genuinely going to say, off you go.
How's it going? Yeah, good. Three long hours, but I really do enjoy it. It is good fun. There's just hundreds of
Hello, good morning.
organising.
It always slightly terrifies me that there's so many people willing to wake up this early and talk about local government for an hour. But there we go. Thank you so much to everybody for being here. I think we've got a really interesting conversation that we're going to be having over the next hour. The topic is back to basics. Can well-run councils lead the Conservatives to victory? And I think that's an incredibly important question given the scale of the task for the Conservative Party over the next few years. As a reminder for anybody that needs it, the Tories lost about 240 seats at the last general election, down to 121 seats, and lost seats right across the United Kingdom, leaving them no MPs, for example, in Wales, and only a couple in London. And on the question of whether or not well-run local government can lead the Conservatives back to victory, there's a couple of competing examples that I'm going to throw out right at the start. And one would be London and Wales. I don't think it would be a controversial thing to say, at least in this room, that London and Wales are two of the worst governed parts of the United Kingdom, and yet they certainly did not act as millstones around Labour's neck, and nor was it the case in Birmingham, which returned 8 Labour MPs out of a possible 10, as well as a Labour mayor. The flip side of that, though, is Ben Houchen and Teesside, who won a pretty impressive victory in May, while Matt Vickers also held on to his seat, which does suggest that there are pockets where particularly well-run parts of local government can act as a check on the national swing. So, a few things to chat about today might be, what does a well-run council actually look like? Is it just efficient services? Is it being debt-free? Is it a record of keeping council tax low? Is it simply avoiding bankruptcy? Certainly a few members of the panel will have a few things to say about that. Now, what do the next 6 to 12 months look like? Particularly in the lead up to the May 2025 local elections. That's the big first electoral test as to whether or not the Conservatives are moving in the right direction, but it's also a difficult landscape, as it's the local elections based on the 2021 local elections, when the Tories, of course, gained 13 councils and 235 councillors. Are we going to be seeing continued financial pressures? Are there going to be any more big bankruptcies? Is there going to be an injection of cash from the Labour government through a new local government finance settlement? What's going to happen with council tax referendums? That has to be renewed every single year, the cap on council tax increases above which you have to have a referendum. Is that going to be scrapped? And if so, is that a big opportunity for the Tories? Is that going to finally be a chance to differentiate councils that only increase council tax by 1%, 2%, 3% to councils that, like Pembrokeshire did in Wales, increase council tax by 11% without that referendum cap? So I'm going to pass on now on to my excellent panel. We have, on my left, we have Councillor Dan Swords, who is the leader of Harlow Council. We have Lewis Cocking, who's the MP for Broxbourne and also a county councillor in Hertfordshire. We have Matt Belton, who is leader of Tonbridge and Malling District Council, a rare council completely free of debt. And we also have Councillor Robert Alden, leader of the Conservatives group on the very bankrupt Birmingham Council. And Joanna Marchong, my colleague at the Taxpayers Alliance, who does our investigations. So I'm just going to pass it on left to right to Dan to start.
Very good. I've been asked to talk about council tax mainly. So in Harlow, we took control from the Socialists in 2021. In our first year, we cut council tax. In the 2 years since, we've frozen council tax. We intend to continue to freeze council tax for the years to come. And I should start by caveating everything I say in that we're a district council and not a county, because I think there is a big difference when it comes to council tax and the pressures you face. But I firmly believe the first thing in terms of how do you go about freezing council tax, and this sounds totally flippant, is don't listen to your Section 151 officer. No Section 151 officer is ever going to tell you to freeze council tax. Indeed, not the Harlow Section 151, I should add, but a Section 151 officer did tell me when I first became councillor it was legally impossible to cut council tax. There is no legal mechanism to do it, which is obviously a complete fantasy. But the simple message from me is in Harlow, we will spend this year circa 250 million quid, as long as we're not buying any more buildings to stop Newham Council buying them. But circa 250 million quid this year. If I put up council tax, it would raise 160 grand by 2%. Our council tax base raises just over £7 million a year, which is tiny in comparison to that. So I genuinely don't think in many district councils it is as complex a task as it may seem to freeze council tax. I think you have to be very creative and most importantly realise that you can have a very diverse range of revenue income from all sorts of other things which don't burden the taxpayer further. So I shall leave my opening remarks at that.
Hello, good morning, everyone. The first point I would make is if you get elected as a Conservative councillor and you take control of your council, please govern as a Conservative. The amount of councils that I've seen, and when I became leader of Broxbourne back in 2019, there were 6 districts in Hertfordshire that were run by the Conservative Party. And I would often think that if people would come and do presentations to us across the piece, you wouldn't necessarily pick out we're all Conservative. That really frustrates me, and I think it frustrates the electorate. And my constituency is covered by 2 councils, one Broxbourne, which is run by the Conservatives, and they do govern as Conservatives, and East Herts, I take a bit in from there, and it used to be run by the Conservatives, and they didn't run it like a Conservative council, and they lost. And I told them I wouldn't be introducing those policies because I think you're going to annoy everybody that believes in Conservative values in your district, and you're not going to get over the line, and lo and behold they didn't. And that's extremely frustrating, because then when it is a difficult national picture, and it has been over the last couple of years in 2022, 2023, what is your local message? Now, if people can differentiate between that and understand that if they vote Conservative locally, they will get good, sound, solid Conservative management, you can hang on. If you choose not to do that, it's very difficult for you. Like my council, when I was leader of Broxbourne, we're one of the only councils in the country not to declare a climate emergency. Now, I'm a geographer by background, so who wouldn't want to plant trees? Who doesn't want to protect the green belt? Who doesn't want to look at nice landscapes? But there's a way you can do that, and that's not necessarily following the left side of the agenda, using that type of woke language. I don't think any of my residents could care less whether I've declared a climate emergency or not. What they care about is us delivering for the environment, and they can see those changes. So when we go out campaigning, we can point to things we've done for the environment, and that's what delivery matters the most.
Thank you, Lewis. Matt.
Thank you very much, Elliot. Good morning, everyone. As Elliot said on the introduction, Tunbridge and Moorland Borough Council is one of the few councils in the country left that is completely debt-free. So we start from a really good place as soon as we set our budget each year, because certainly unlike our county council in Kent, we don't have to start by paying millions of pounds just servicing the debt before you even pay the debt off. Now, the easiest way to achieve a debt-free council is to keep it in Conservative control. Win elections, and where you've got the opportunity to stay in control, do so. We have had a majority Conservative council from 2003 all the way to 2023. Like many, we had all-out elections in 23, which were tough for the party. We fell 2 seats short of a majority. And fortunately, we have come to an arrangement with two friendly independents, and we are running the council on the mayor's casting vote to stop one of these rainbow coalitions from coming in and destroying the sound financial management for which Tunbridge and Moorlin has become renowned. We know that we have to do a bit more than that, though, because every year our savings target is increasing, and we see, as again, like Dan, as a district council, we do see significant cost pressures. I can't say temporary accommodation often enough as to where a lot of those cost pressures are coming, particularly for a local authority that is not too far from London and has got very high land values and very high house prices. So that's a particular concern, probably our biggest challenge towards our maintaining our status as a debt-free council. But we also recognise that actually, as and we mentioned earlier, the council tax cap has been introduced over the last decade or so. What that's meant is that in order to get the income into the council, we've had to look at fees and charges much more. Well, there's only so far you can go before it becomes politically unpalatable, and we have to consider how we're going to fund strategic regeneration projects like that going forward. So it is hard to maintain a debt-free council, but we know that we can turn around to the taxpayer every time we're up for election and say, you are getting the best value for money that you possibly can from Tunbridge and Moorlin Council because we've kept the Conservatives in the administration. And that's a dividing line that we can draw at election time with all of our other parties. It's something that we did in 2023, and we won 6 seats by majorities of 25 votes or fewer. So we can do it with a strong message even in a tough year, and that sound financial management is something that resonates with the electorate. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Robert.
Thank you, and welcome to Birmingham, and you join us in this great city on the first anniversary of 2 Section 114 notices and a Section 5 notice being issued against the Labour administration. The first Section 114 notice was really clear about the reasons for Birmingham's bankruptcy. It was a failure to deliver savings. The council had missed 54% of its savings in 21-22, over 80% of its savings in 22-23. They had an equal pay liability, originally quoted at 760 million, that's now risen to 867 million. And they had an Oracle system that was rolled out. It was meant to cost 90 million, that was what was in the budget. It's currently costing 140 million, and they still haven't got a final bill because we're a year and a half away from it finally being implemented correctly. The second Section 114 notice, you might think, is even more astonishing, because it was issued for a failure of the administration to agree to act on the equal pay liability to get a grip of the financial situation in Birmingham, hence why the Section 5 notice also got issued. And the impact that's had on Brummies across our city is, as well as now having commissioners in the city, spend control boards, discretionary spending's been stopped, obviously, there's increased borrowing, increased asset sales. There's been drastic cuts to services as well, because one of the things Labour are really good at when they get a financial mess in a council is not actually making the tough choices to restructure how you run a council, but instead just to do the salami slicing on the frontline services that residents actually really value. And of course, the final impact on Brummies has been a 21% council tax rise over the last 2 years. And I have no doubt if they get the discretion of a cap being removed, they will be facing far higher council tax rises in the years ahead. The other thing that's come out from this whole process is just the massive financial messes that's been made. So as well as the mismanagement of IT contracts like the Oracle rollout and the mismanagement of employment contracts like equal pay issues, they built an athletes village for the Commonwealth Games in 2022. It was a brilliant success, the Commonwealth Games. That was run by Andy Street and the government. The only bit the council was in charge of was the athletes village. It never housed a single athlete. It's still not finished here in 2024. And they've just sold it at a massive loss that has left the council with a debt which will cost repayments of 18 million a year for the next 40 years. So that is a massive failure on a grand scale from an organisation that's let down its local residents. And it's not even the end of the mistakes, because just this last month the Cabinet had to admit that the CCTV control centre they originally planned for 2.9 million is coming in at 5.5 million. Massively over budget again, no lessons learned from the failed IT rollout on Oracle. So the impact on Brummies is a double whammy of higher taxes for fewer services. But just to tie it back to what the question we're being asked is can well-run councils lead the Conservatives to victory? What we saw this year in elections in Birmingham was actually Andy Street was the mayor of the West Midlands for the election, very sadly lost by 1,500 across an electorate of 2.4 million. Had a swing to him in Birmingham compared to the last mayoral election. It's the only region in the West Midlands where actually Andy's position improved. We saw Andrew Mitchell holding on in Sutton Coldfield, where the Conservatives were forecast to lose on all the election predictors. And we've seen a swing to us in every single council by-election there's been this year. So what the party needs to learn is where there's badly run Labour councils and where there's well-run Conservative councils, we need to be using those examples far more nationally to show the electorate that where Labour get in, they destroy the finances, and where Conservatives get in, they deliver value for money and good quality services.
Thank you, Robert, for that very stark contrast between a well-run council and a poorly run council. Joanna?
Hi, so in some ways it's a good thing that I'm going after Robert because he's just given you a singular council example, yet it is the probably most dire example, but a lot of councils are also facing these same kind of decisions that have been made and then the consequences of said decisions. What I think is most important to remember is that councils must go back to basics. We need to focus on the essential services, and then anything else after will come as a bonus. But right now, they're all in a situation where essential services and frontline services have to be prioritised. When this doesn't happen, it's the taxpayers that pick up this bill, and they're the ones getting their frontline services cut. So, the potholes need to be filled, public safety has to be a major priority, and bin collections have to be made. All these things are what councils primarily should be doing. And when that's not attended to, everyone in their council wanting those frontline services are the ones to suffer, and also realise that they're not getting what they're paying for. Their bills are going up, and essentially no one's happy. So it is the major priority that councils must look at. When we're doing examples of waste within councils, a few stories that I've picked up on are the 52 million in EDI roles. EDI roles which are additional to HR roles. So you have two bodies that are doing the same thing. One getting paid tons of money and doing a job that quite frankly can't be fulfilling because they don't have enough things to keep them busy. Then you have 2 million spent on adult cycling lessons. Now, these projects are weird and wonderful. I mean, it would be lovely if councils could afford to do that. However, they're not in a situation where that is possible. These are the kind of projects that need to be slashed right away. We have 5 million being spent across the UK on parklets. Now, that's the most egregious case. It's a COVID initiative that was brought in to allow people to socially distance outside of their homes. It was supposed to be demolished after COVID and saying it's only a temporary measure. However, we're spending millions maintaining them and also dealing with the wide range of consequences of homeless people, for example, using and abusing those spaces, places in the public. It's just costing tons of money. And also they might be pretty structures, but they don't add to any priority services that people truly want to see. So tough decisions have to be made moving forward. And any Tory that thinks they can prove that they can manage a budget effectively and deserve to be running government needs to know that frontline services are what is going to get them there. So that is what they need to do. They need to focus on the essentials and prioritise the things that everyone expects their council to be performing.
Thank you, Joanna. Well, my panellists were so pithy in their opening remarks, I'm actually going to take the prerogative of the chair to ask a couple of questions myself before throwing it to the audience. Dan, to start with you, despite repeated cuts or freezes to council tax and Harlow Council very much being a model for many councils around the country, the Conservatives lost 4 seats on Harlow Council in 2024. Are we being naive to expect the voters to notice well-run councils, given they often don't even notice them when they live there?
So Harlow Council has existed for 50 years. For 47 years it's been run by the Labour Party. For the last 3 years it's been run by the Conservatives. So to say in May we won against the odds was a slight understatement. We had Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner visit us 3 times. We had over 50 visits from shadow cabinet ministers, knocking up in housing estates on polling day. You'd sort of amble into a housing estate with 2 or 3 of you and see 30 of them. And you'd think, oh, they must all be here, and ring someone else and say, no, I've just met a busload from Scotland that have turned up to knock up, which is a true story. And we turned up to the count, and I was told repeatedly by the Labour group, I don't know why you're here, you may as well go home, you've been absolutely hammered, and yet we won. So it was absolutely against the odds that we won, and genuinely I think we won, as Lewis was saying, because there was a very clear difference. People, repeatedly on the doorsteps, people said, I will vote for you locally, but don't come asking at the general election. And so I see it in a slightly different way. I mean, yes, Harlow freezes council tax. We don't have parishes. Post-war Newtown, we're the biggest social housing landlord in the east of England. Like I said, we don't have parish councils. We cut the grass every 10 days. We have weekly bin collections. We're building hundreds of new social council homes. We're the fastest growing place in the country. We're rebuilding a whole town centre and doing all of that whilst freezing council tax. So actually, no, I think if you have a very clear message, talk about what people care about, as Lewis said, deliver on it, and do it in a conservative way, then I think voters will reward you to that regard.
I'm very pleased to have been put in my place. Lewis, something we've touched on so far, the panel's touched on so far, is a couple of local government issues that have national ramifications, or at least parliamentary ramifications. For example, the referendum cap. How important do you think it is that Conservative MPs are active within Parliament around issues on local government?
Well, very, very, very important, because we've never come back into government unless we've been the biggest party in local government, and that is how, in the short term at least, because we will have a Labour government for 3, 4, maybe 5 years if they go the full term, is the only chance that we've got at any type of level across the country to be able to show that delivery. And there's lots of issues that Labour are tackling nationally, whether that be new housing targets, where they've, in my view, changed it to make Tory councils build more and Labour councils build less. If you look at what they've done across the country, go and look at Labour councils like London and what have you, their targets have gone significantly down, and then where you get to the Tory shires and what have you, they've gone significantly up. Now, I'm not opposed to no new houses across the country, but it's just got to be fair, and everywhere's got to take their fair share of it, and they've got to be built where young people want to live. And if you ask lots of young people, it is mostly cities where they want to go to, because that is where the infrastructure is. They're coming on to discussing about the single person discount, 25% off council tax, which I think is atrocious. If they've not hit pensioners enough with taking away their winter fuel allowance, they're about to get a double whammy, because that will affect loads of pensioners up and down the country. And council tax for some of these people is a significant bill now. It has been rising in lots of places significantly, and I suppose there's a wider discussion around what we do with council tax, because when I first moved into my property, it was about 30-40% cheaper than what it is now. So we can't continue on that path, and I do think, I suppose, the cap is there in some regards to keep us councils, or to keep councils when I was leader, kind of on the straight and narrow. It's very difficult for us to make decisions locally that not affect the national picture, which is why the parliamentary party and councils all need to be on the same page, particularly if you've got a Conservative member of Parliament and a Conservative council. Of course you should be working together, of course you should be making each other famous, because it only works if everyone's on the same page. I mean, we found that last time with the parliamentary party and all of the wars that were going on. People don't vote for divided parties, and the electorate is a lot more intelligent than we give it credit for. And if there is an argument on your council group or the council group and the MP, the electorate will know about it, and they will think, well, we're not going to vote for this team because they're all not getting on locally, because if you don't get on locally, it's the residents that pay the price because you can't deliver.
Absolutely right, Lewis. Matt, having a debt-free council is obviously a virtue and something to be celebrated, but we've got the national debt at over 100% of GDP now, and yet I'm not sure voters, frankly, care that much about the national debt. Do you think locally in councils around the country that voters are going to be that bothered about council finances when services are struggling and council tax is already so high?
Well, voters in Tunbridge care about national debt because the Taxpayers Alliance bought its bus the other week to Tunbridge High Street and parked it there and saw it go up every single time they walked past to get their shopping. So I can assure you they care about it in Tunbridge. But I think the serious point that I would make on this is, if you stand for local council, if you get involved in your local community, you do so because you care about the place. You want to make the place that you live better. You want to see it improve, and you want to achieve some of the wishes of you and your neighbours. The way to do that is through local government, because that is why you've stood for election in the first place. So for those of us who believe in the power of local government, we need to give councils the freedom and the flexibility in order to achieve the change that you've stood for and promised your residents to achieve. And that starts with the budget. And it starts, as I said earlier, with understanding the income you've got, and within the constraints of that, identifying as much as possible to be spent on delivering in your community. So something we've done in Tunbridge and Morlin is we've invested quite heavily this summer in antisocial behaviour enforcement officers. So we've got particular issues around parks and around rivers where we've got youths who've sort of been getting up to no good. The police are obviously incredibly stretched at the moment. So what we've done is we've brought in a team of people to go and work with the police, work with young people, work with youth clubs around the area, and just make sure that the place in Tunbridge Town Centre, where we've done this particularly well, is as safe as possible, so people feel able to go out and enjoy the beautiful town that we've got. Now, that's something we were only able to afford to do because we'd kept the council on a really...
Thanks,
Okay,
Steve.
that wasn't what I expected to happen. But anyway, but we did that because we have managed the finances really well. We've been able to invest in a key area that residents expected, and we also were able to understand that that's what leads us to being the borough in Kent that's got the lowest crime levels. So starting from a really good place with your budget allows you to do so much more.
Steve Ray must be hungover this morning. 9:30 is a surprisingly late start for him. Robert, I mean, you mentioned that Birmingham Council's bankruptcy is cutting through to the doorstep. I'm just wondering if you have any advice to door knockers as to how to communicate how Conservatives can do better.
Absolutely. Well, I think the first thing you can point to when you're in Birmingham, at least, but I suspect this is true of all the Conservative opposition groups who've got bankrupt Labour councils in front of them, is be able to highlight actually that they were warning about these very issues. So in Birmingham, not only is it a travesty that they failed to recognise a legal issue like the equal pay crisis, they ignored the opposition warning them for 6 years, they ignored the auditors warning them, they ignored the trade unions ignoring them, and actually had this really perverse situation in the 2022 council elections where you had cabinet members on Birmingham City Council tweeting that the council needed to pay their staff equally, and then saying in meetings after the election that they wasn't aware that there was an equal pay issue. And it's a completely untenable position to be in. You can also point to really well-run Conservative councils, be able to demonstrate that actually you can look, and we're very fortunate here in Birmingham, we've got Conservative-run Solihull on one side, and Conservative-run Walsall on the north, and Conservative-run Dudley. And all of them have been able to show that they've been able to keep council tax lower than Birmingham, they've been able to deliver better services, and that they're not slashing frontline services. So residents in many parts of the city are literally able to look over the road and see that the grass is cut when they look at a Conservative council, and it isn't in Birmingham. And yet Solihull council tax bills aren't rocketing, and Birmingham's are.
And finally from me, Joanna, do we need to simply accept that waste is a fact of life, or can more be done to tackle waste in local government?
I think there's a lot of ways that we could tackle waste. Again, with the low-lying projects, it's exactly these kind of projects that lead a council into bankruptcy, into debt. When they choose to spend their money in this way, and also a lot of these projects and schemes are inefficiently run and costed. So if I draw attention back to the 2 million on adult cycling lessons for adults, in so many councils, they were not group sessions. They were one-to-one sessions. You have to sign up to them. And that's a huge cost of labour. We have to have an instructor for every single session instead of, say, a group session. And that's the cost that councils are making. In Croydon, they were doing it. And that was the most mind-boggling thing, where Croydon was offering these one-to-one sessions, knowing that their council is also bankrupt. So it's the death by 1,000 cuts. If we don't fix these small projects and get rid of them, then we're never really going to tackle the issues. And again, as Robert said, he's always stealing my points, if people are looking over and seeing that the grass is cut and that there's no potholes in their roads, etc., then that's what they will remember, and that's what they will be seeing every single day, rather than saying, oh, I learnt to ride a bike with my council 3 years ago, or something like that. So there's definitely more that can be done.
Thank you, Joanna. So I'm now going to throw it out to the floor. So hopefully we have a roving microphone somewhere, and we have quite a lot of questions. So let's take the lady at the front here to start.
That's my ward colleague.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was something that Joanna said with regard to obviously visibility of the services that we need to provide. I'm a Kent County councillor, so we have discretionary services and we have, you know, statutory services that we have to do. So what we have with adult social care, for instance, is that 70% of our budget is spent on 3% of the population of Kent. So consequently, no one can see that, but they can see the fact that all the potholes aren't being filled because we have to spend the money on these statutory services that we have to provide. So how do we get around that? How do we make the services that we do provide more visible to show people that we are actually doing proper things with their money, as opposed to you know, what we have to do, which is basically invisible.
So, county council expert.
And I would agree with you up until a couple of years ago, and I suppose what the argument is now, I think I wouldn't necessarily raise adult social care on the doorstep, but what I would raise is SEND, because lots of people raise that with me. So more and more people now, particularly when you get into the county election cycle, raise that county council issue with me. Before 5-6 years ago, when we campaigned in 2017 in the county elections, no one would raise adult social care, children's services, SEND. They would always talk about the highways, but now obviously we've had more diagnoses with children with special educational needs. Lots and lots more people raise that on the doorstep, and that's something that they can relate to, that they don't necessarily see where the services are. So I would use that to explain this is why we've got to focus on these services that you don't necessarily see. I think adult social care, there's not enough of a population, particularly in Hertfordshire, that's affected by adult social care to make it relevant to everyday people when you knock on their door. But I think SEND is at that place where it's getting there. So that's what I'd focus on the doorstep.
Kent has twice the number of cents of any other council.
Well, lots of county councils have issues with SEND, but you need to have a concrete plan of how you're going to tackle it. But I can assure you the top two issues that will come up in the county elections will be potholes and SEND. So unless you've got a message on SEND, those are going to be really difficult conversations on the doorstep.
Thank you. We've got the gentleman at the back.
Yes, good morning everybody, and thank you to the panel for such refreshing honesty. I'm a senior local government officer in the east of England, working for a small UTLA, upper tier local authority. But as a lifelong Conservative, I've got to say, I think you've got your hands tied behind your backs, in all truth. In my authority, we've got a projected £10 million overspend on adult and children's services. If you really reduce that down to the lowest common denominator, that's the breakdown of family. And I was in a seminar yesterday where Miriam Cates was talking as Centre for Social Justice, saying that, you know, we really as Conservatives need to promote the value of a stable family unit. The projections are that this debt is going to keep on going out and out, you know, making these interventions, as we use in local government speak, about taking children or vulnerable adults and then paying up to £2,000 or £3,000 a week for sheltered accommodation, social workers. I don't know how that gap's going to be closed, and whether sorry. We could do stop the spending and then maybe see societal breakdown, but that's what I'm saying is there's so many wicked problems across society. There's a lot of waste. For example, in my authority, sorry to hog, but we had a Conservative administration last time. On one hand, they stopped an interim director on £1,000 a day and pretty much removed him immediately, and then sacked a chief executive after 8 months and paid him off £180,000. You know, it's like, well, on one hand, you're making a saving and then you're costing 100, you know, that kind of money. So there needs to be consistency, and also with constitutions. Why can't we standardise constitutions across local authorities? Yeah. That might help Conservative councils run better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Good points. Well made. I just want to pick up on the last one about standardising constitutions. And I say this as someone who is trying to govern on the mayor's casting vote at the moment. And I genuinely spend 70% of my time making sure the right members turn up to the right meetings and are fully briefed about everything that one of my opposition groups might get up to. And the constitution can be your greatest strength as an authority with great political with a very balanced political arrangement, because if you're able to get yourself organised, you can punch above your weight. We've got 20 out of 44 members, obviously 2 independents supporting us too, but one thing we've been able to do is get organised as a group of 20 Conservatives, and that's enabled us to get to govern with stability despite the political situation. And you use the Constitution to do so. You use your decision-making processes. Something that we changed a couple of years back was we basically removed a number of committees because there are certain councillors in other parties to the left of us who seem to get elected because they like attending committee meetings. Well, we're a council that wants to deliver stuff. We don't want to sit around sort of having a nice chat about whether there should be double yellow lines on this road or that, because I could go to the pub and do that if I wanted to. So again, I don't necessarily, great points, but I don't necessarily agree with the last one, because I think that sort of, and there's something I've learned over the last year, you need to use every lever you can, given there's so many authorities in no overall control, to make sure you form stable administrations. And stable administrations deliver more results for the residents in the particular locality.
Matt, if we go to the pub, we're not talking about double yellow lines. Got some more questions. Gentleman, second row.
Good morning. Robert Smart, Councillor Robert Smart from Eastbourne. There are a number of little dichotomies. First, let me just thank the Taxpayers Alliance for doing what you do in terms of highlighting some of these issues. But in terms of, there are 2 timescales we're working to. One is the council elections next year, and one is 2029. And in terms of the latter, what I think we do need is a comprehensive approach to reforming local government finance. I'm in a small authority, and the county takes most of the money. The public do not understand the split in terms of council tax. The issue in terms of business rate split is beyond almost everybody. I mean, I've gone to the MHCLG on it. I mean, it's beyond everybody. So, I mean, in the long term, we actually do need a long-term reform of finance. It may not just be the fairer funding thing, but I just wonder whether the Taxpayers Alliance will actually try to put something together. Thank you.
Dan.
Yeah, well, I don't speak for the Taxpayers Alliance, but they do a very good job on those things. I think you're quite right. You know, I don't think anyone disagrees about the system of local government finance, and it's probably the most bonkers way it could be done. But I think the LGA, particularly the Conservative group on the LGA, are doing a very good job on that, and other bodies like the DCN. But it comes back to a point that the chap made earlier about our view on council tax particularly. And my view, very simply, is I would never put up council tax until I'm absolutely satisfied we have done everything else that can possibly be done before we burden the taxpayer more. And we're actually very lucky, coming back to some of the earlier points, I'm not just saying it because the leaders sat here, in Essex, because we have a very good county council which runs services very well, and we don't have the problems with the potholes and other things that many others do, thankfully. But I think that, particularly for local districts, that's the point to start from when it comes to council tax. Start with an absolute red line. And like I say, that can be a challenge, particularly with a Section 151 officer, that it's not on the table. Until a point I am absolutely satisfied we've done everything else we possibly can. Usually it comes in about the 3rd week of December when you find out the government grant is better than you thought it was going to be.
Robert, I believe you want to comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Matt earlier in his comments talked about a responsible way of running a budget, which was you look at how much money you've got and then you work out how you get your budget to fit that. We need to not fall into the trap of what Labour have done for the last decade, which is to say the amount of money they wish they had and then try and set a budget to that amount. And so, yes, we absolutely need to look at local government finance. Kevin and his team at the LGA do a great job lobbying on behalf of Conservative councils. But actually it would be a mistake for the National Party, 5 years away from a general election, to try and rip up local government finance, because we're not in control anymore. We shouldn't keep acting like we're the government. We're not. There's a role for the Taxpayers Alliance over the next couple of years to lead that work and have think tanks do that work so that the government in waiting, as we'll hopefully call them in 5 years' time, actually can prepare. But it would be wrong now, 5 years before a general election, to come out and say this is the wholesale change we'd make, because I'm telling you, whatever the change is won't be popular.
Any more questions? We have Gentleman in the middle here.
Hello, Chris Bowman from Tunbridge Wells. I was a great fan of Cameron and Osborne, and when they brought in austerity. As far as local authorities, the initial cut seemed to be about 10%, and most local authorities seemed to agree with that. But when it reached the 25% level, a number of my friends just said it was just impossible. Would you agree with this, and was austerity in retrospect slightly overdone?
It's a good question, and I'm sure there'll be historians who write lots of long articles and books about this sort. I got into local government in 2015. That's when I was first elected. So austerity had kicked off by then, and there was absolutely a need for it. I mean, anyone who remembers the financial crash knows the state of the public finances by then. The challenge for me with local governments in particular is identifying what it's good at and identifying those areas where it needs to learn from the private sector. So I'll give you a really good example of this. I became leader in 2021, and I went through the budget line by line with our finance officers, and I wanted to know exactly how much we were getting in from services where we could charge and how much they were spending. And I was horrified to learn that our cemetery that we ran was making a humongous loss. Like it was barely covering half of the cost. So what we did is we said, look, we're going to take a tough decision here to increase the charges on the cemetery in one fell swoop by 81%. So it nearly doubled. And yes, we got a bit of criticism from the opposition groups to do that, but we made the point. We said, look, here is a service that we are providing, that the council happens to own the cemetery, it's in Tunbridge Town, and ultimately we can't afford to run it based on what we're charging at the moment. And if this was to be run by any other organisation, if it was run by a church, for example, or anyone else, then you wouldn't have a situation in which the costs were not covered. So again, local government has got to learn from the private sector. Just because businesses can come and go, and it's kind of hard, despite what's going on in Birmingham, for local authorities to come and go, doesn't mean that there shouldn't be any learning between the two. And I think that builds into the austerity points, because yes, there's clearly been a tough time for the sector, but if we learn from the private sector, if we make sure that our services actually can afford themselves, then we're in a position to do them in a way that's financially sustainable, and with a bit of political work to identify what's important, you can continue to win elections and deliver what you set out to do.
I think going back to the question, I think it depends what council you were. I think some councils probably still waste too much and probably could deal with some more cuts. Other councils that probably went too far. I mean, there are some councils that I go to, I'm still astounded what they spend money on, and I think, well, if you sent me in there, I could save you a couple of £1 million. It can't be that difficult. But then other councils that have kept council tax low and that have got a low base in terms of what money they bring in, it probably did go too far. So I think there's a balance to be struck. But as I said, I'm still amazed now when I go into some councils and I think, oh my goodness, you've got it easy. You don't understand what difficult decisions are, and you could definitely save the taxpayer a bit more money. So, as I said, I think it depends on local circumstances. Some was probably too much and too far, and others not far enough.
Well, Lewis, given we're in Birmingham, you could go to the town hall and offer your services.
They're good at hiring consultants.
Any more questions? We've got the gentleman just next to you, Ben.
As a former council leader myself, same as Lewis, I would look around my colleagues and think, I can't tell who any of you are, whether you're Conservative or not. The truth is, most councillors are completely not particularly partisan at all. They're just like, oh, I want to do a nice job for my residents, right? And all politicians of all parties say the same thing. How do we ensure we end up with councillors, cabinet members and council leaders that think like Conservatives and do Conservative things? Because that's actually the problem here, isn't it?
Possibly a problem with the parliamentary party as well. Anybody?
It goes back to candidate selection, actually, whether it's a parliamentary party or local authorities. And I'm not just saying this because my association chairman is sat on the front row, but we were really, really clear, and we were quite ruthless with our candidate selection ahead of our 2023 elections, that we needed to make sure that they were ideologically sound, that they would were well known in the community, so they were doing all the good community work, but also that they were focused on winning their elections. And actually, if you combine the message that we had, which was very clear going into our 23 elections, that we had the highest recycling rates in Kent, we had the lowest crime, and we were judged to be the council with the best value for money, with key activists in the right seats who knocked on doors and delivered leaflets, and we had a good digital campaign, we were able to get over the line. I mentioned some of the slim majorities we got, and we did increase our vote share in certain wards too. So actually, by asking for those three things, the ideology that you're standing on, the work in the community, and giving a good message, you can win elections and get good quality councillors selected. And again, I'm not just saying it because there's a couple in the room, but the 20 colleagues that I've got, given our political balance, I could not ask more for, because they are all absolutely solid, they're absolutely on it, and we're really lucky that we're able to govern with Conservative principles despite not having a majority.
I should of course say that Lewis was excluded from my remarks on the parliamentary party. Darwin, the young gentleman on the right here, please.
Hello, Stuart Hoddinott from the Institute for Government. Just a quick question. The cuts fell hardest on the most deprived local authorities in the country, also the ones with the greatest need. I noticed that most of the local authorities here are from the southeast. We've talked a lot about bin collections, potholes, but as someone else said, 2/3 of spending is on children and adult social care. How would you actually manage those services in the most deprived parts of the country to deliver what's needed for residents?
Well, I'd start by saying that Harlow has some of the most deprived neighbourhoods in the country. We're a post-war new town. In the 1970s and 80s, over 90% housing was council housing. Still to this day, the average, like I said, a third of the town is still social housing. The average council rent in Harlow for a two-bedroom property is £110 a week, and we have huge pockets of deprivation and some enormous challenges. That's why some of the discretionary services we offer, I think I'm right in saying, although I don't know if this is true, and I am timid to say it in the Taxpayers Alliance tent. We have discretionary services like a free petting zoo. The council owns a petting zoo that's free of charge. It is an absolute tourist attraction for young families because it's free. Every neighbourhood in Harlow has free paddling pools and splash parks in the summer, and there's a whole host of things that we do for that very reason. So I'd slightly reject the premise of the question, because Harlow is has huge challenges to that regard. But I think it comes back to your point about how do you manage those services, and some of the other things that have been said is what council shouldn't do is what I call initiative-itis, have an initiative for everything. And have a project for everything that makes no difference to people's lives. Announce £1 million for this, £5 million for that, £2 million for this, and not deliver any outcomes. Come back to your central services, deliver them very, very well, and invest in what matters to people, housing being one of them, housing being the biggest factor, temporary accommodation, whatever way you want to look at it for a district council.
Robert, I think there are people in Manchester that would consider Birmingham the South East, but I think as a representative from the West Midlands.
Well, like with everything, they don't get it all right in Manchester. Look, it's easy to say when you look at numbers, raw figures, that large metropolitan areas, deprived communities had larger budget cuts. But actually, when you look at the figures, Birmingham Labour had a great wheeze over the last decade. They took the council's budget in 2012, they added everything they wanted to do. They added an imaginary inflationary figure and then claimed that money had been cut from their budget because it wasn't given to them, despite the fact it was actually nothing that was ever given to them. It was just what they wanted to have. So you can't always believe the figures that Labour politicians have stood up and said. I wonder how many of you in the room know what Birmingham's budget is currently. I'm guessing no one. Sorry? No, it's 4.3 billion gross spend. You're not telling me that you can't save money from a 4.3 billion gross spend budget. And that's the problem. It's very easy to sit and ask for more money. It is much harder to sit there and actually decide, you don't know best, let's share some services with neighbouring councils. to say that you don't know best. Let's actually move the workforce to having a more agile workforce, to do what other small councils have been able to do, but Birmingham doesn't, through generating energy by solar panels on roofs, insulation on buildings to lower energy and heating costs, to cut down on procurement. In the year that the council got a Section 114 notice, they spent 30 million on consultants into a council when they knew they had no money. When the council knew they had financial pressures, they decided to spend £500,000 by pausing works that were happening on Victoria Square so they could put on an event for 10 days, knowing that that would cost them £500,000 in compensation. And then they took 3 years to admit that they owed £500,000 to a company and they just hadn't bothered telling anyone. Money can be saved from large metropolitan budgets. And one thing actually Manchester Council have done quite well is they actually have always managed to balance their budget. What went wrong in Birmingham was they talked about the budget they wanted and not worked to the budget they had.
I'll take a trio of questions now just to save a bit of time. So we'll take the gentleman closest to you, Darwin, the gentleman up here, and then the gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. Paul Redstone, East Sussex County Council. We're in control of it as Conservatives just. How do I know that? Because we commissioned an independent peer review by the LGA. And to any county council, I would recommend that to demonstrate that you give value for money. And we came out really well with that. But will that help us retain control next May? I'm not sure. With great respect to Dan and Matt, we have, as Lewis said, we have adult social care, we have children's services and SEND, and those are the killers, whereas residents are only interested in potholes, quite frankly.
I think, was it the gentleman here? Sorry.
Yes, David Gray. I'm a town, borough and county councillor in Gloucestershire. My question is, so many of the elections that I've been involved with, what the local party has done has made a difference, but not as big a difference as what's happening in the national party. And there's so many councillors that we've lost in elections where it's had nothing to do with what's going on in the local council. It's entirely down to what's happening in the national party. The May election that's coming up, and the county council elections are coming up in May in Gloucestershire, will be the first big test for the new leader of the national party, and it can be like one of those SpaceX launches where it either blows up on the launch pad or soars off majestically. So what is your two-sentence advice to whoever becomes the new national leader as to what they should say ahead of that election that can boost the chances that we actually get airborne and get momentum coming out of those elections?
Okay, and...
Hi, Peter Williams, DCPC for Watford. And one of the things I like to do, Lewis, is put up a chart of, given that Broxton is now the only Conservative borough district left in Hertfordshire, of low tax Broxton, 140 for a Band D, around that, and all the others going up to Watford, Lib Dem run Watford, almost twice as much. But what I want to do is, invite you to give some more examples of where boroughs and districts did not run themselves in a Conservative manner in Hertfordshire. Or if that's too impolitic, let me ask a less controversial but still controversial question of the panel, which is, what do you think of the whole vexed issue of going unitary? Because there's an argument that boroughs and districts can be little test tubes of policy. They can compare and contrast, left-wing run versus right-wing run. On the other hand, maybe it's better just to go unitary and save taxpayers' money by deleting that layer of government. What do you think about that question?
So we'll start with, so the first one was East Sussex Council, good value for money, adult social care versus potholes.
Yeah. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, I'm the first one.
All right, okay,
yeah.
you were looking at me, so I assumed you did. Actually, I'll cover all three at once if you don't mind,
Sure,
because I think I'd be really quick. We did a peer review too, just a couple of, a year or so before our elections, and it was the best thing we ever did in terms of actually aligning our priorities as members with what the council needed to do and getting council officers who can be inflexible to a position in which they realise that they should start listening to us. And I'd had a bit of trouble with some of our council officers when I became leader because it was change and we wanted to deliver change. And that was the moment in which they thought, crikey, these guys are serious, because the peer review was saying the same thing. The second point, what would be my sort of two-sentence advice to the new leader? Obviously, it depends who it is. You all know who I'm backing. Tom Tugendhat, who happens to be our local MP too. So my 2-sentence advice to Tom would be to show off Tunbridge and Malling Borough Council to the rest of the country, because he's seen for a decade as our local MP just how we've delivered in the community. The third question about unitarisation. Look, residents do not care which council delivers their services, whether it's the county council, the borough council, the unitary council, the metropolitan district. It doesn't matter. This all comes down to efficiencies. Councils, in my view, should be small enough to care and big enough to matter. There is a perfect geography for that. I think it's bigger than what most boroughs and districts are at the moment. But my particular borough is a borough that is really made up of a number of very distinct communities who look towards bigger towns that are outside of the borough. So we are an artificial construct that was created in 1974, and there'd be very few tears shed if Tunbridge and Malling Council didn't exist in the future. Now, if that means we have to go down the unitary route with a mayor, then absolutely we need to be open for that, because if that creates more opportunities for investment, allows us a greater voice on the national stage, and frankly results in better service delivery, then we shouldn't be precious that we've got 50 years of Tunbridge and Malling Borough Council that we need to keep hold of.
Joanne, did you have something to add on any of those three?
Yeah, I think the first question was really interesting when you mentioned the peer review. It's one thing that, as you said, you found success in it, and it's one of those basic things that, of course, you will find success in it. Once you evaluate the state of which you're in and you have that transparency and that accountability, you understand that there is work to be done and it's in a confirmed, formatted sense. That means you can focus on your messaging. So we see here now that even in Tory councils that aren't running it conservatively, we see that they've lost their primary messaging, and that's not, residents aren't the only people forgetting it. It's also the council is in charge. So when it's a kind of theme that we haven't really spoken about today, but the level of transparency and accountability, it just means that we will all remember the goal that we're striving towards, and there will be some kind of consequence for that afterwards. And messaging is important. So it's more things that council should do. Definitely get some kind of authority in to showcase this is how bad it is and where we can go from that, or this is how good we are, and then also celebrate that.
Lewis, advice for the new leader when they come in?
Well, I'm backing Rob Jemrick. I think he's going to be brilliant if he wins the leadership election. I think he's got a very good chance. And I think we've got to show unity. We've got to get all of the MPs on side, and we've got to deliver that good message. And I don't think he's afraid to tackle the big issues of today. Even when we campaign in local elections in Broxbourne, immigration is the number one issue that comes up on the doorstep. When I first stood as a local councillor, and it's amazing what people think local councillors have the power to do, I stood just before the EU referendum, and no one cared what I was going to do on Broxbourne Council. Are you voting Leave or Remain, Lewis? Because that's how we're going to decide how we're going to vote for you. So they think councillors have got lots of power that we all probably wish when we were councillors that we had, and we would be able to deliver a lot more. In terms of unitary, no, I don't support unitary. I think districts are the best level of local government. They're the closest to the people. I think it's very difficult for counties. No one knows who I'm a county councillor. No one knows I'm the county councillor in Hoddesdon. It's too remote and too far away from the people that it serves, and I would die in a ditch if someone tries to take Broxbourne Council away, because I think it delivers really good value for money for the taxpayer, and it's really well respected. And I think there's lots of analysis when places do go unitary, and there are head-to-heads between district and county councillors. It's often the district councillor gets elected onto the new unitary because they're more well known within their community, and they can point to a lot more that they've done, because the county council has lots of services which we've touched on that are really remote from apart from roads, are really remote from lots of people, and that's very difficult to get that message across. In terms of East Sussex, I mean, the county council elections are going to be incredibly difficult. Lots of people care about the roads, but I think we've just got to come up with conservative policies and deliver those when we're in charge. For example, I'm in favour of 20 mile an hour zones around schools, but I'm not in favour of blanket 20 mile an hour. I think that we've got to draw comparisons. We've got two county councils, Oxfordshire and Cambridgeshire, which are run by Rainbow Coalition. So it is amazing what a bar chart in a leaflet can do when you're comparing, well, this is what you may get if you vote for the other side, and this is what we're doing. It is astounding what people pick up from a photograph. So we have got two county councils that we do not control, which have Oxfordshire has had a very difficult time with their send and what have you. So there are comparisons we can make, and that is what we've got to do on the doorstep, and keep it local. Make sure you say, look, it doesn't matter what's going on with the parliamentary party in Westminster. This is what matters to you, and this is what's at risk. Do not risk the council finances. There are loads of examples you can point to around councils going bankrupt. In our local elections in Broxbourne, it was a very difficult national picture back in May, but our message to all of our residents was, don't risk the council because you may regret it.
Robert, I believe you have a few words.
Yeah, thank you. Just to rattle through a couple of quick answers. So on advice for the leader, I'd say improve support from the central office. I'd also say actually learn from what David Cameron did as Leader of the Opposition. He was really good at highlighting well-run Conservative councils, good initiatives they've done. That's what we need to be doing. But I'd also have some advice for any candidate next year. Don't wait for anyone else to win you your seat. You've got 6-7 months from now to the election. Spend every single day you can out campaigning, working for your community. That is your best chance of winning elections next year. Don't rely upon anyone else. On a unitary debate, it's not for me to just tell counties and districts how to format. It's for each area to decide how they want to be governed, frankly. I believe it's localism. And then on just adult and children's services, whatever the budget the council has, there are people at the basis of this, and it's about getting the basics right, because the basics don't cost more than your budget you have in your council. And the basics, if you look at a place like Birmingham, it was not failing to do DBS checks. Birmingham didn't do DBS checks on the drivers of children home to school transport. It's not failing to deliver kids to the wrong school. Birmingham delivered kids to the wrong school. They delivered children who didn't have the ability to communicate to schools when no one knew who the child was, because the child couldn't tell the school, and the school didn't know the school that was meant to have the child where the child had been dropped. Those are basics, and it's not a budget issue, it's a failure of a management issue.
And Dan, one word answer. Will you join Lewis in dying in a ditch to save your district council?
I'm on the exec of the DCN, so I should have a line on this. Which is terrible that I don't know. I would die in a ditch, yeah, absolutely. Although I believe in unitaries.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming to hear us talk for an hour, and if you could please thank my wonderful panel in the usual way. We have a wide range of other events in this tent over the day, so please do. And we need everybody out for the next event, I'm afraid.
interfere with anything, is it? In terms of
Sam asked us about it. I said it's not a problem as long as they're fairly self-contained, but I didn't know then what time they would come in. So, do we know where Lord Frost is? Is he away?
He's around.
I've seen him and he's sitting in the back and skip past.
Right, Sam, what do you think about the screen? Are we happy to go up and start?
okay, I'll assume everything's fine unless you say otherwise.